Good morning and welcome to this event, which is the first in 3 this week. Will replace the PLA's 5th annual environmental conference that is normally held in person at the Museum of Docklands. I'm Tanya Ferry, I'm the Head of Environment for the PLA and I'm your chair for the series of events. Just a word of admin, you are in what might be called listen-only mode. And we will be asking you to provide questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. We are not following the chat is not monitored, so please make sure you ask the questions in the Q&A. After we hear from our 4 speakers today, we will also have a panel session for me to convey those questions to them, and we'll be joined by James Trimmer, Director of Planning and Environment from the PLA. Just like the previous 4 years, we're going to be hearing about the fantastic work that's been going along on the river, which despite COVID, lockdowns and Brexit, action has been continuing throughout the year. In 2020, we focused the annual conference on the basis of what a net zero river might look like. And these sessions have been split into sustainability, innovation and change, and habitats to reflect the key topics focusing on those actions that are to respond to the climate and ecological challenges that we face in the Thames, the South East, the UK and globally. Today we're focusing on sustainability. We're going to focus on the actions of activities and actions rather of businesses and organisations to improve their impact and continue to facilitate jobs and a better environment for future generations. The PLA itself this year has set a goal of reaching net zero by 2040 at the latest. We're cutting our carbon emissions in half by 2025 and switching our vessels to HVO, a biodiesel, as an initial action. We have refit our Gravesend offices this year to make them more energy efficient, improving usable space for staff and covering the roof in solar panels and tiles. Having also refreshed the port's air quality strategy and climate adaptation assessments, we continue to plan for the river's changes to make decarbonisation possible safely and sustainably and justly, leaving nobody behind. We've retained our green tariff discounts for shipping for another year in partnership with the IAPH and Environmental Ship Index. We've expanded our own scheme to facilitate future rewards for inland operators in developing the Thames Green Scheme with Newcastle University. We look forward to this year and the operators returning to the river and joining us on this scheme in due course. We continue to reduce our use of single-use plastics and still remove and monitor the litter in the river throughout 2020 through our passive collectors, which we will be expanding the network in 2021. We've completed designs to enhance salt marsh habitats ready for completion in 2021, and we were planting wildflowers where we had grass and lawns that require maintenance in our remote sites, which we hope will also reduce our carbon emissions. In order to maintain and increase our energy resilience, the PLA is increasingly planning to use renewable energy, even extending to a tidal demonstrator site on the river this year. We know technology is limited to create some change, so we've also announced this year a Sustainable Innovation Fund to try and leverage a improved performance and help the river change again. The first call for the innovation is a zero emission berth, and we'll speak more about that tomorrow. So today, focusing on sustainability, we have speakers from shipping, vessel and terminal operators, as well as local government, focusing on the delivery of improvements across the sector. And I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker. Peter Livey is the Managing Director of Great Britain and Global Environmental Ambassador for HMM. He's got 25 years in trade, investment, logistics and shipping experience. And he's going to talk to us about the sustainable trade.
morning. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you to the PLA for inviting me to speak on a favourite subject this morning. I hope you enjoyed the video. That was from last June, and it seems such a long time ago. Remember when we were starting to come out of lockdown for the first time. Our current pandemic will mean significant changes to how we work and live going forward after much heartache. The vaccination programme has been a real success and many challenges lie ahead. But front and centre, we have the prospect of a much bigger danger. And climate change is that danger. It's the defining issue of our time. It's a threat to human lives, which increases climate volatility, escalates uncertainty, disrupts value chains, and it's one of the most important issues the world is facing today. The HMM Algeciras, which is on the video, and its 11 sister ships, represent a huge leap forward in technology and CO2 emissions reduction, but it is not a zero emissions vessel. Indeed, the technology doesn't currently quite exist for zero emissions vessels for carrying freight. As shipping accounts for nearly 3% of global CO2 emissions and around 90% of global trade travels by sea, the industry holds significant potential to help create a carbon future neutral future economy by 2050, trying to contribute to the Paris Agreement's goal of staying well below 2 degrees in temperature rise. In 2018, the International Maritime Organization announced a strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from shipping by at least 50% by 2050. But HMM others in the industry and beyond think this isn't aggressive enough, and we're working towards being carbon neutral earlier than that. In fact, by 2050, instead of half, we want to be completely carbon neutral. So in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I hope to introduce you to HMM and the industry sustainability issues. Now on this picture, we see here something which is a drawing of an Egyptian seagoing ship. It's believed by historians that the first long-distance trade began between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley in Pakistan about 3000 BC. And in those times, long-distance trade was limited almost exclusively to luxury goods like spices, textiles, precious metals. And cities that were rich in these commodities became financially rich too. And it wasn't long after that the trade networks crisscrossed the entire Eurasian continent, inextricably linking cultures for the first time in history. 5,000 years later, and 90% of all goods travel around the world in rectangular steel boxes. An estimated 35 million of them are currently in circulation. So long distance maritime trade has certainly become very much the norm. When the Algeciras, which is about 400 meters long, a little bit longer than the Shard, made its maiden voyage, she joins an awful lot of other deep sea vessels that have called at terminals in the UK since the coronavirus lockdown was introduced, keeping the country stocked with essential food, fuel, medicines, as well as other goods. So very big volume of cargo moves by ship, and the challenges are huge. If we think about what is in a container, this picture represents the main products that were transported in deep sea trade nowadays. There is little dispute about the fact that shipping is the most carbon efficient mode of transportation. but according to a recent report of an IM1 export working group, it accounts for about 7% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions. A white paper released for the Transport Intelligence Europe conference states that researchers conducting an evaluation for the World Economic Forum found that the entire voyage from China to Europe is equaled in CO2 emissions by about 200 kilometres of long-haul trucking in Europe. Maybe a bit more than the distance from London to Birmingham. So this focus in the environment isn't a recent concession to popular opinion. At 2019, HMM was the winner of the Environmental Award for its performance in reducing CO2 emissions by 44.5% in the past 10 years. And we've been very much engaged with industry. Some of those initiatives are reflected here, and some of those involved. One of the major initiatives is called Clean Cargo, and Clean Cargo is involved in having globally accepted standards and methodologies introduced for measuring emissions and eliminating harmful materials released by the shipping industry. And we joined with Clean Cargo in 2006, and every year we now measure CO2 emissions with their methodology. And it's become the ocean shipping standard used by other initiatives such as the United States EPA SmartWay program and the Global Logistics Emission Council. And it enables ocean carriers to track their emissions, benchmark their performance, and report to customers what their performance is as far as CO2 and SOx and NOx and particulates and other emissions. So that's one of the major initiatives, and it's a business-to-business forum. There are shipping companies involved and many major brands, as you can see on the screen. Every spring, the Clean Cargo emissions results from the previous year are compiled and reported by our Secretariat, Business for Social Responsibility, and HMM have our reported results audited by the Korean Register of Shipping. In 2020, Clean Cargo reported a 5.6% reduction in CO2, measuring 2019 versus the previous year. And using Clean Cargo methodology, the chart on the bottom right is HMM's annual CO2 reduction versus 2008. We estimate that we will have reduced our emissions almost 59% when our 2020 results are finalised and fully audited, and that usually comes out about April or May this year. Finally, on Clean Cargo, a guide called the Sustainable Freight Procurement Framework has been produced to assist any shippers or forwarders, any exporters looking at ways to improve their environmental impact. So it's a very practical guide. Another initiative is one that we're involved in is called the Getting to Zero Coalition. The Getting to Zero Coalition is a partnership between the Global Maritime Forum, the Friends of Ocean Action, and the World Economic Forum. They outline the challenge like this: to reduce emissions by at least 50% by 2050, zero emission vessels, or ZEVs, and by association zero emission fuels are a requirement, since improvement in energy and operational efficiencies, while critically important, is not enough. Achieving the 2050 target requires immediate action, as there is a need to have technically feasible, commercially viable and safe zero emission vessels on the deep sea trade entering the global fleet by 2030, as well as a clear path to provide large amounts of zero carbon energy sources, such as hydrogen, needed to allow the rapid up ZEVs in the following decades. The ships have a lifespan of 20 plus years, and new fuel infrastructure might take up to 50 years to reconfigure. So today, HMM are celebrating this new class of ship. These container ships are wonderful. The cost benefits they will bring are great, but we have our sights set firmly on 2030 and on 2050. And our R&D teams are already organised and looking into a range of research studies, including the exploration of commercially viable hydrogen-powered systems and collaborations with companies such as Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering in Korea for smart ship development and technologies such as we find on the HMM Algeciras. So our major targets. So by 2020, and we won't know till April, but our target was to reach 50% CO2 reduction. We think it's going to be 59%. 2030, we wanted to reduce emissions versus 2008 by 70%, and we want to be carbon neutral by 2050. A huge undertaking, as mentioned, because the technology and fuel distribution doesn't currently exist. However, there are a number of fuels and technologies under development, and we believe that by massive collaboration with ports, terminals, and we see in the new Freeport strategy that there may be space to develop new fuels which could be used to power our ships. One of the most exciting developments might be hydrogen-related fuels, which could be used, if they're produced by green energy, to fuel our deep sea tonnage in future. So this year we are launching another set of ships. We've got 8 15,000 TEU smart ships. Ask me about that later, to bolster our fleet and further reduce CO2 emissions across our fleet. The Egyptian seagoing vessel that we started with may have been small and had a bigger crew. The HM Algeciras has 23 crew, but it was a zero emissions vessel. So perhaps we can learn something looking back as well as forward to overcome future challenges. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really interesting approach to tackling those challenges going forward, and quite right, lessons learnt looking back should absolutely be part of our progress, and we do hope you get the result you want in April as a result of the monitoring. Just a reminder, if you've got questions, as Peter's indicated, if you can put them in the Q&A, we will have a panel session at the end of the presentations. Next, we're going to a very different size vessels and a very different use of vessels with Victoria Limbrick, who's the Energy and Environmental Resources Managers for the RNLI, who has been focusing on the RNLI's National Carbon Strategy. And she's going to talk about how the charity, beg your pardon, has been developing a sustainable operational station on the River Thames. Thank you, Victoria.
Good morning, everybody. I'm trying to share my screen and not do it horribly. Sorry. Okay, hopefully you can all see that and hear me clearly. So yes, good afternoon. So the RNLI, along with everybody else, are working towards a much more sustainable future. And at the moment, we operate 238 lifeboat stations, 4 of which sit on the Thames, at Gravesend, Tower Pier, Chiswick and Teddington. Our volunteers, supporters and staff expect us to operate to a high moral code, and this expectation has fed into our overarching sustainability vision, which is to operate as a good citizen in all of our activities to sustain and secure our future. Financial sustainability is to a large degree a core part of our work as a charity, and we have a primary responsibility to ensure that any investments can be justified to our amazing supporters. Similarly, our operations, engagement and fundraising activities add significant social value, And we're working hard to develop frameworks to measure this. And this will allow us to focus on areas of success and develop approaches to enhance our performance and social value add elsewhere. Our environmental impacts are diverse and complex due to the nature of our operation and the geographical spread of our sites. So to that end, the RNLI have recently set 4 key environmental ambitions to consider sustainability in everything that we do, to really embed sustainability into all of our processes and policies and every decision we make. We will aim to send 0 waste to landfill from 2030, including our highly robust and indestructible boats. We want to operate a 0 carbon road transport fleet, including our logistics, by 2040. And we aim to reach 0 carbon emissions by 2050 without purchasing offsets from core donation funding. That is particularly challenging when you operate a large fleet of diesel-fueled vessels. And as Peter already alluded to, alternative propulsion is a huge subject and definitely somewhere that we're heavily engaged. We've also set our first tactical target, which is to remove all avoidable single-use plastics from our operations by our bicentenary in 2024. And this is something that our Gravesend Lifeboat Station have pioneered with the removal of single-use plastic water bottles from their operations. The construction, operation and maintenance of our buildings is central to making progress towards any of these targets and moving towards a more sustainable organisation. And to date, much of the focus on our building design has been on environmental enhancements, and with great success. For the last 10 years, the RNLI has incorporated heat pumps and solar photovoltaics into building design, developing a seawater source heat pump in partnership with the National Trust in 2014. We have a building design guide which embeds environmental design criteria for every new building and significant refurbishment project. And renewables are included as standard on all of our sites unless the roof orientation or ground conditions are unsuitable. Alongside our major projects, we also operate a programme of retrofit for efficiency and incorporation of renewables. Thank you. As the majority of the estate will be managing in 2050 is already built. We now have 33 heat pumps, 29 solar arrays and a wind turbine up in Aith in the north of Scotland. Our building design measures are having to adapt and develop to address both our internal environmental goals around carbon and waste and to tackle the external environmental changes which are being driven by climate change. So we're in development of 2 key strategic documents. The first is our 0 carbon strategy, which was due to be developed last year, but my being on furlough and COVID put paid to that, so that's in development now. And the second is really critical to our operations, and that is a climate change adaptation strategy, which will look at the impacts of rising temperatures, sea levels, water scarcity, increased temperatures, and extreme weather events on our operations. So, what do we see as a sustainable lifeboat station? In order for the RNLI to move towards truly sustainable design, brilliant, thank you. We need to look at much more than including environmental mitigations and renewable technologies. Sustainable organisations are those that meet the needs of as many people as possible, utilise as few resources as possible, and engage with and are responsive to as many of their stakeholders as possible. So for us, a sustainable lifeboat station is one which is affordable for the RNLI to build, maintain and operate, which is operationally effective, and which minimises our impact on the environment and enhances well-being and social value. Making a sustainable decision and a design choice often involves a conscious and balanced consideration of short and long-term benefits and trade-offs. The environmental choice may not always be the truly sustainable choice, and reducing over-specification and focusing on site requirements is a key aspect of truly sustainable design. Future-proofing is always a temptation, but I think it's a bit of a worrying phrase. But we look at likely future options, and building in the flexibility to adapt to those is critical, especially when you're designing for a 75-year operational lifespan. Our Tower Lifeboat Station project has been badged the Tower Sustainable Lifeboat Station for good reason, and we want it to represent a step change in the way that the RNLI treats sustainability within our estates. The lessons learned and processes developed on this project will be embedded in the estates design manual and incorporated within future project processes. In order to ensure all the parties within the design team were aligned, we issued a sustainability standards document, and all contractors and members of the design team are asked to incorporate those clearly defined requirements, standards and expectations into all aspects of the project. A whole life approach is being taken at key decision points to ensure that value engineering is undertaken with a full understanding of ongoing maintenance and material impacts. And that methodology for Tower will also be introduced for future projects. We've picked and chosen selected BREEAM credits to formalise standards around key areas such as construction site management, waste generation, whole life analysis and material selection. Need to understand if the steel is coming from China to feed the European manufacturer, we're still likely to be having significant environmental impacts. So there is a real trade-off to be had. We've put a strong focus on build quality, material efficiency, and taken a fabric-first design, which will help us to reduce our reliance on the engineering solutions. We've undertaken a detailed thermal analysis of the building so that we can really drive improvement in facade performance at design stage and reduce those M&E system loads. The resulting low energy base load will then allow us to increase the impact of our on-site power generation through solar panels and allow the water source heat pump to deliver heating, hot water and potentially cooling. The building has a 75-year design life for whole installation, 25 years to major maintenance, and clearly understood interim maintenance and repair procedures are a requirement to achieve these lifespans. We've involved the local engineering maintenance team throughout the design development, which is allowing us practical solutions to be developed and life cycle issues to be raised. For example, the new broader pontoon means that there's not actually a large enough dry dock in the Thames for us to maintain when we need to take that pontoon out and refit it. To build in flexibility, we've had a study undertaken to understand potential future requirements for all types of alternative fuel storage and management. We've looked at energy storage potential and the feasibility of grey water recycling. Our crews will experience improved comfort with better daylight, greater temperature controls, improved stability and reduced wave impact and pontoon movement, which is a significant issue for them. The tender for our main contractors and their subcontractors has been required to include a significant section on sustainability, and we've set those requirements rigidly into the contracts. As well as setting targets for our own operations, the RNLI are well positioned to be the catalyst to enhancements in the infrastructure and sustainable measures in the communities and locations in which we operate. Collaboration and knowledge sharing is going to be the key to delivering organisational, national and global targets. Working to ensure a sustainable future estate which can support zero carbon operations and is robustly prepared for climate change is a significant challenge. And I hope that this has given you some insight into the importance of the approach we take in managing our building and moving towards a more sustainable future. Thank you, and thank you for your patience with my complete lack of ability with technology today.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Very interesting and a great challenge to balance sustainability in terms of the climate adaptation as well, rather than just in isolation. I can see that we've already got some questions popping up, so please guys do continue to share your thoughts and questions for the panelists. We're scaling back up a little bit here in terms of ship size, but not necessarily. I think the challenges are similarly sized. Patrick Moss is the Senior Environmental Control Engineer for Ford, based at Dagenham. He's worked there for 14 years in various roles, right from his apprenticeship, so knows the work very well, and has been developing the sustainable strategy for the terminal in a very busy environment and in an urban context. So over to you, Patrick. Thank you.
Yes, good morning everyone, or good afternoon now, should I say. Yeah, as part of this week's PLA environmental webinar series, I'll be giving you a brief overview of Ford's, the Dagenham facilities environmental and sustainability efforts. So the two topics that we are going to briefly cover are is the the local ecology and how we develop that with our environmental volunteer events, and then lastly at the end we've just got our sustainability achievements and our objectives moving forward. So the Dagenham Ecology partnerships. So within the Ford Dagenham team, we've continued to build strong relations with groups such as the RSPB and Thames 21. And we do this by organising clean-up events along the Thames riverbank and surrounding habitats. As you can imagine, the River Thames does bring a lot of river pollution down. So we try to do our part and keep the riverbeds as clean as possible. Over recent years, each clean-up event has removed approximately 5 to 10 tonnes of waste. So it's quite frightening to see how much pollution we do have in the waterways. So yeah, we also have another collaborative effort with Ford and our local fishing club, because as you can imagine, our site is quite large. So yeah, we use the local fishing club to ensure our habitats in and around the lake are maintained and managed. On the next slide, we've got sort of a satellite view of the Dagenham facility, but sort of more broadly outside of that, you can see how close we are to the Rainham marshes. So the greened out section is the sort of the rough footprint of Ford's Dagenham facility, and the blued out section is the Rainham marshes, so which cover approximately 411 hectares of area, and that's just an approximation of their footprint. I'm not quite 100% sure where their boundaries lie, but yeah, we actively manage all green spaces across our site, and as you can see, as you move more into the Ford facility, the three areas that are highlighted are key environmental habitats that we manage on a regular basis. So the top left photo, as you see, is managed by a local fishing club. But along here we have, along with this, we also assist the Environment Agency to manage the tidal controls within the river beam, which is the photo you see on the right. This is part of the Thames Flood Defence Network. We also actively encourage all wildlife habitats to flourish, sort of more commonly and recently. Kingfishers, swans, mallards, moorhens, coots, carp and roach, and the list goes on, are habitats that we try not to interfere with, but we encourage as we develop. So moving on to sort of the local site-specific sustainability achievements, you should be able to see 7 sections of how we've delivered on these metrics. So as I was saying, these are just some of the environmental objectives and achievements the Ford Dagenham site has made over the past few years. We have 3 wind turbines on site, and they generate approximately 10% of our estate's energy usage. And as of this year, our remaining electricity used across the site is now sourced from the renewable energy grid. So that's one of our biggest parts, contributions to achieving our net zero target by 2050. We've also achieved significant reductions in our carbon footprint and waste generation. Practices that were established were simple items like recycling, waste segregation, which in turn has reduced vehicle movements across the site. But we've also now introduced on-site composting. We have a photo of that on the slides moving forward. However, we are moving forward on site looking at renewable energy options. So along with our current wind turbines, we are looking at more of those where possible, but we're also looking at items such as solar and hydrogen generation. As I mentioned, our corporate net zero objective of 2050 is each site across Europe's objective. So we are steadily working towards that. But with every objective there comes tough problems that you always face. So we're working with surrounding work groups to try and achieve these goals. So moving on to sort of precious materials. So precious resource is water. We always know that water is in high demand. So we've always got continuous improvements on our usages. As you can see, our corporate objectives tend to be set on a 5-year basis. So from 2016 to 2050, we had a 30% reduction target. We did actually achieve a 54% reduction. So we've done that by implementing a major monitoring, investigation and repair program. A lot of leak detection was done on site, and the reason why that was carried out is due to the age of our site. We were first constructed in 1929, so you can imagine the infrastructure demands that we've had over these years. Relies us on to do some continuous improvements and monitoring arrangements on our underground networks. So moving into towards 2023, we've got a 15% target with a corporate objective with a corporate objective by 2030 to achieve a further 50% reduction. And lastly, moving on to another one of our sustainability achievements with respects to waste. As we all know, waste is one of the highest polluting factors globally. So we again have set corporate objectives to make those necessary reductions. So as you can see, the target that was recently set from 2017 to 2020 was a 15% reduction on our general wastes. Obviously 2020 played a difficult role in many parts across the world, but our reductions were significant before that. So the 45% reduction actually includes a COVID factor. These are just some simple illustrations of the savings that we're making. There are further targets that have been set corporately for until 2023, with again the aim to eliminate single-use plastics by 2030. The top right photo, as you can see there, is the on-site accelerated composting process that we've now introduced on site. So no green or wood waste or food waste now leaves the site, and that gets reused across the estate. So there are simple initiatives and long-term goals that the company are working towards to try and achieve their net zero, but they're trying to do that on quite a few different fronts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. Some interesting challenges and solutions there on site, particularly the idea of composting sites, quite an interesting one for us at the PLA as well. And I'm sure there'll be some questions for you later around some of the challenges you've overcome over the last couple of years and continue to tackle. Last speaker in the panel is Bruce McVean, which is he's an acting assistant director for city transportation for the City of London Corporation. He's transport planner by his knowledge, but he's going to talk today about how the climate strategy that the City Corporation has implemented might impact the river. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Tanya. I'll just share my screen. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here today, and perhaps going to a slightly more strategic level than the last few presentations. But I just wanted to give you all an overview of the work that we're doing around climate action, and then just focus in a bit more around freight as one of those activities, and probably one of the areas where there's the greatest opportunity to make more use of the river to meet not only our carbon reduction targets, but also our wider objectives around transport and making the square mile a much more attractive place to spend time, to walk and cycle as well. So just to start off with an overview of our climate action strategy, which is very new, published in October last year, and we think sets out a really ambitious approach to achieving net zero, not just for our own activities, but for the whole of the square mile as well. And the strategy has three strategic objectives. One, to minimise the effects of climate change by reducing the carbon footprint of both the city corporation and the square mile as a whole. To ensure that we can adapt to the extreme weather that's coming and that's already locked in as a result of climate change and emissions that have happened and will happen over the coming years, and to recognise and champion sustainable growth and recognising the role that the City of London as the UK's financial centre can play in driving sustainable growth. So in terms of headlines of what we've committed to achieve, we want to achieve net zero in our operations by 2027. And then beyond that, by 2040, we want to achieve net zero across all categories of emissions, including scope 3, which means all of those emissions that are outside of our direct control and don't arise directly and arise as a result of our actions, but aren't directly produced by ourselves. So quite ambitious there, we think quite a strong leadership role around that as well. And then we want to support and challenge businesses and organisations in the square mile to achieve net zero by 2040 as well. And as you'll probably know, that's 10 years ahead of the current national legal requirement for net zero. We want to make sure that all of our assets are climate resilient. So that's those within the square mile, but also all the things that we look after across the whole of London as well. And these commitments are based on applying science-based targets developed from a baseline of our current footprint. We're investing £68 million of our own funds to achieve them, and we expect a significant proportion of that to become from projected operational savings as we move towards net zero and make all of those changes. So just a bit more detail in terms of what we'll do ourselves as the corporation to meet those 2027 and 2040 targets. So we're in the process of designing 20-year plans to ensure energy efficiency and resilience in our own properties. We're moving towards the use of life cycle costing and targets for all of our suppliers. We're aligning our investment portfolio with the Paris Agreement and ensuring those investments have business models that have a plan to transition to net zero. We're increasing the amount of carbon that's been removed from the atmosphere through the planting and management within our open spaces. And perhaps most importantly, we're integrating climate considerations into all of the decision making that we do at the City of London Corporation. But as I said, this isn't just about what we can do as an organisation ourselves, it's what we can achieve across the whole of the square mile. And to do that, we need to effect change through both hard and soft interventions. So, for example, we're reviewing our planning regulations to identify additional ways to ensure the use of low carbon materials and low carbon and low environmental footprint design in new buildings and refurbishments across the square mile. We have also agreed to develop a new climate action fund, which would see us, together with other large businesses in the square mile, combining financial resources and skills to invest in low and zero carbon technologies, decreasing carbon emissions across the city. And we'll work with all businesses and in particular support small to medium sized enterprises to speed up the transition to a net zero economy. We'll be dedicating more street space to walking and cycling, including making our pavements wider, looking to deliver new green spaces within the square mile, and looking at timed street closures as well. And we're also doing some scoping work around freight consolidation as well, and I'll come back to freight in more detail shortly. And then finally on resilience, we're investing £15 million to ensure resilience across the city, and that includes over the next 6 years embarking on a series of pilots to inform a longer term programme. And this includes things like considering heat resistance and management of heat within the public realm and public spaces, new water infrastructure such as sustainable urban drainage, rooftop greening, catchment greening, and afforestation as well. All of those and other activities that are relevant to us addressing climate risks and mitigating those. So one of the things that the City Corporation is always keen to do across, all activities and climate change and carbon emissions reductions is one of those, is really kind of try and take a strong leadership approach and use our position to champion wider change as well. And just a couple of the things that we think set us apart in terms of this strategy. One is, of course, that we're putting resilience and that adaptation on a par with our net zero ambitions, and that we've used the most authoritative methodologies to ensure that we can demonstrate best practice. And that includes being the first local authority body to adopt a fully funded action plan which addresses all categories of emissions, including those harder to treat Scope 3 emissions that are beyond our direct control. And like many other organisations, these account for about 97% of our emissions. So it's where we can have the most impact, but it's also crucial that we all start to look and think about those widest impacts as well. And we think there's actually scope here for London as a whole to really become an exemplar of considering all emissions associated with actions, whether those are direct or indirect as well. So just to look in a bit more detail at freight. So transport is actually a relatively small part of the city's carbon emissions, about 7%, but nonetheless, if we're going to move to net zero, we need to do everything we can and reducing carbon emissions from transport and traffic is going to be absolutely key to that. And this is about reducing the number of vehicles on our streets, as well as ensuring that those vehicles that remain are zero emission vehicles as well. And in 2019, we adopted a 25-year transport strategy. And in that, we've set ourselves the target of reducing the number of motor vehicles on our streets by 50% by 2040. And that really looks to mirror what's happened on our streets, as you can see from the graphic here, over the last 20 years or so, where we've seen motor vehicle volumes fall by about 50% and a very significant increase in cycling as well. And I think it's really important is this isn't just about reducing emissions from the vehicles themselves, but also creating the environment where sustainable modes of transport like walking and cycling can flourish and appeal to a much wider range of people as well. So specifically around freight, what we're looking to achieve is a reduction in the number of motorised freight vehicles by 30% by 2040. And we think the main way that we'll do this is through consolidation, so consolidating deliveries into fewer, fuller vehicles at sites outside of the square mile. And we've we've got a really good base to build on from that, because we've been requiring the use of consolidation centres for all major new developments through the planning system for several years now. And one of the activities that we'll be doing as a kind of quick win around climate action is doing more work to scope the potential to increase that and potentially provide a dedicated consolidation centre for the city. Those vehicles that remain, we want to keep them off our streets when they're at their busiest times for people walking and cycling, and aiming for a 90% reduction in the number of motorised freight vehicles on our streets in peak hours, so morning and evening rush hours and at lunchtime as well. Of course, deliveries are made at all times of the day, so it's crucial that we provide alternatives for those essential deliveries that need to be made. So that includes much more use of both cargo cycles, but also pedestrian porters to make deliveries, and setting up a series of last mile delivery hubs within the square mile. The first of those should be operational in the summer, with Amazon running as a last mile hub out of one of our car parks. We of course need to make sure that the vehicles that remain are zero emissions, and we need to make much better use of the river for both inbound freight and outbound waste. And then finally, we need to look at servicing as well. And I think that there's huge potential to reduce the number of vans that are on our streets because they're servicing or maintaining buildings. And a lot of the lessons that we're learning through the freight program can apply to that as well. So just finally, on the river and the really great opportunities that will come in the medium term from that. So this is an artist's impression of what the consolidated market site in Dagenham, just next door to the Ford site, will look like when it begins operating in 2026. And great opportunities here to use the river more for bringing freight both into those deliveries into that market, but also from that market into central London. Of course, if you're going to deliver into central London, you need wharfs to unload as well. So we think there's great potential to use Walbrook Wharf, which some of you all know is currently used for outgoing waste, for inbound freight too. Lots of work to be done to get that working, but we'd hope that would be operational by 2030. And in the meantime, there'll be opportunities for use in the meantime as well. And we're really pleased to be part of the Light River Freight Steering Group that the PLA are chairing to look at developing and exploiting those opportunities as well. So thank you, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We're just going to get the other panelists so you can see everyone. And I have a list of extensive questions, so be ready. Just as a reminder that this is recorded, so if you missed anything, you want to go back over it, you can do. There's a question about technologies and innovation that's going to be covered in more detail later in the event tomorrow. So if you want to catch up on that, or if you can't make it tomorrow, please use the recording. So we'll give Bruce a small respite, having just done his presentation, and I'll take a question about the ships for Peter, if I may. The question is, we're hearing a lot about CO2, what's happening with NOx, NO2, PMs from the vessels. Do these vessels meet IMO Tier 3?
Right. Yes, well, actually, the reason we focus on CO2 is because that's what everybody's wanting to hear about, mostly. But actually, we measure NOx, SOx, any type of waste, chemicals used in the ship's hull. It can help streamline the ship moving through the water, and a range of other measures. So all the new ships exceed quite substantially most standards, and obviously all the older tonnage meets all the current regulations, but yeah, the whole gamut is looked at. And indeed, we produce a 70 or 80 page report on sustainability every year, looking at every aspect of sustainability as far as the ships are concerned. Quite a thick, substantial read, and it goes into extreme detail. But certainly all the headline ones that, and by the way, thank you, Alison, for that question. It was excellent. But all those headline ones, these are all covered under our annual audits and measuring sort of methodologies.
Brilliant. And just a follow-up one from Jack. Why could you explain why the 2008 year was chosen as base?
That's when we invented the methodology. So when we started having a common methodology to start measuring things, we immediately started measuring. So this wasn't just HMM, this was all of the clean cargo companies, because the reason for it was initially, if somebody was manufacturing, say, a ball bearing in the United States and wanted to move something from Long Beach to Shanghai or vice versa, more likely, their competitor would come up and say, this is how much CO2 I've emitted. And they would say, this is how much CO2, but none of them had a standard. So that was the reason for the 2008. We had to establish a global standard against which all freight could be measured equally, so that it wasn't fake news.
Great, thank you very much, Rita. Okay, I have a question for Victoria. Sticking with ships or vessels for a minute, what steps are the RNLI taking to reduce emissions from its vessels?
Right, that's a big question. I'll try and answer it succinctly. So we've got a large alternative propulsion project starting later on this year once we've got our operations onto the beaches to cover our staycation plans that I'm sure we're all gradually formulating. We're going to be really looking to understand what the options are for our boats. It's extremely difficult because we have very unpredictable usage patterns, very quick turnaround. So the lifeboats on the Thames, for example, can be called out even before they've come back from the last shout, which really limits the opportunities for making best use of battery technology. We're looking at the feasibility of alternative fuels in the interim before the technological options for completely different engines are available. So biofuels or lower carbon, lower emitting fuels are definitely going to be an option in the next couple of years, if not sooner. I think the future for our larger vessels is probably going to be something more akin to hydrogen, just because of the performance and the range that we need. But whilst we're waiting for technology and actively working with those people developing it, we're looking at the options that we do have for changing the way that we use our vessels, potentially looking at remote options for search and rescue rather than using our boats to undertake that search and rescue, so that the boats can just go direct to the casualty rather than spending lots and lots of time circling and doing all the search and rescue patterns. So lots of different pieces of work. It's absolutely forefront in our mind, and we know that we can't rely on diesel for very much longer at all.
Great, thank you, Victoria. This is, I've lost it now, sorry, apologies, scroll back down. The question for Patrick. Can you identify in the initiative that you've done that's made this biggest single impact on the performance of Ford at the sites? I assume this question is.
I'm guessing this is from the two metrics that I mentioned. Yeah, from a water saving side, I would probably say just general leak detection and repairs from the age of our site. So yeah, we are growing closer to 100 years old here, so that was one of the biggest drivers for us. But also just general improvements inside the facility. So repairing leaks where possible, and then just more efficient usage. From the waste side, we try to just encourage people to continue to do what they do at home. But we all promote recycling at home, so it shouldn't be any different at work. So just very simple principles were applied, and then when you can show an economic benefit to that effect, then it's a winner on all sides. So ethically was our main driver, and then from the money savings, it drove people more, which was good.
Great, thank you. I should have said at the beginning, apologies. We have James Trimmer with us, Director of Planning and Environment, who's going to answer the PLA questions rather than myself, because I can't answer ask myself the questions. So this one's for Jim. To accommodate the greater drafts, I assume this is in terms of decarbonisation and changes, dredging will need to be done regularly. Are there any environmental assessments undertaken prior to this? What actions are taken to ensure marine life isn't lost or affected?
Thank you, Tanya, and for the question. In short answer, yes. A lot of, or most of the dredging that's undertaken now in the port tends to be in the individual berths rather than channels. So it's sort of discrete areas of dredging. And we issue licenses either for 1 year where we're not sure about the effects hydrodynamically or environmentally, and later for a 3-year period. So we have a greater understanding and certainty for the terminal. And what we look for, in addition to usual application, and that covers Water Framework Directive assessments and views in terms of hydrodynamics from the application, we do undertake consultation with a range of statutory and non-statutory consultees. And this is regardless of whether the site is close to a site of special scientific interest or a special protection area, so actually greater environmental protection. And with those responses, we then undertake an expert analysis of what they say and whether A, the dredge should be undertaken, and B, more usually, what conditions. And that relates to seasonality, say for fish or for birds, or for the type of dredging methodology that should be taken. And very commonly now we use agitation methods on the river, so actually resuspending the silt that's in the berth. So again, what state of the tide those should be undertaken on, in order then that we can assess where this silt is actually moved to on the river. So it's a very thorough process undertaken by the experts in the planning and environment team. And then a full report is prepared that's put for decision. So actually, it's a very comprehensive assessment process.
Thank you, Jim. So sorry, I'm having trouble with my scrolling. Apologies, I keep tapping the screen. Bruce, a question for you. You mentioned greening the catchment, and there's just a request whether you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yes, I think as people might know, the City of London Corporation manages very significant areas of green space across London, including Epping Forest, Hampstead Heath, and others as well. So, and obviously those form the catchment areas for local water courses that then feed into larger ones like the Thames as well. So, you know, there's a role there for us to look at how we can green and manage those areas to help control runoff, but also how we can use those areas as well for our own, you know, to contribute to our own kind of carbon can't say it. Carbon, yeah, thank you. Goals as well. So, said looking at not just what we can do within the square mile, the City of London itself, but also our role as custodians of those green spaces for that too.
Very similar to the PLA approach. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Victoria momentarily. A question. This is from one of the arbitrators, so you won't have seen this. Is how are you working with the crews in terms of shaping the station's sustainability?
Incredibly closely. So it's very easy to say, right, here's a building, and it will do all the things that on paper you said that you need it to do. Go and use it. That would be probably the cheapest way to do it, but definitely not the most useful way to do it. So we have quite a rigorous requirements gathering process right at the very, very outset when we know that we're going to be building a new station or making significant changes. That's generally attended by as many of the crew as we can muster together, and the local management teams, the regional management teams, to make sure that we really have a great understanding of local issues, site-specific problems and legacy issues that exist in the current building, so that we can move those forwards. I think on the tower project, we've done that even more so and there's a really big focus on engagement with the crew and approval from more regional local teams, involvement of those teams in the design process. Very handily for us, one of the sustainability consultants is actually one of our volunteer crew on tower. So we get some definite crew insight very frequently on that. So that's been really, really enlightening. But yeah, to build a sustainable station, it's got to work for the guys and girls that are using it every day. A big change for the tower station is that we're going to really tackle that wave movement, because it is one of the most, it's like living on a boat, and especially on the Thames stations where they're so busy, the impact on the crew of any minor issues with the station or daily niggles can be really significant. So yeah, absolutely, the crew are absolutely central to the way that we design our buildings.
Great, thank you, Victoria. I'm going to go back to Jim. I'm going to combine two questions from John Spencer here. One around the use of biofuels by inland vessels, and this should be perhaps the way forward. And similarly, and I think this is probably combined actually, how do we make sure that more people are aware of benefits of the use of the river for freight?
Thank you, and thanks to John. I think in terms of biofuels, I think he's right. And clearly the PLA's commitment to use HVOs, as Tanya said earlier, I think is testament to that. We see it as a transition to the transition in terms of fuels. And until we have a better steer, which we're working on at the moment in terms of hydrogen comes about, then clearly it is a better option in terms of carbon, in terms of NOx, and in terms of particulates. So we think it's good and have committed to it, and I know that John has in his fleets as well. And I think that together with increased supplies on the river is something that we see as the big chicken and egg issue. And clearly, as supply comes on stream, then it's going to be more attractive for operators to use. So yes, we think it's a short to medium term option until new fuel supplies are there. In terms of promotion, and I think John's question in particular from SEER is really about planning. And I think here this is a classic disparity in what planning policy says, which is uniformly to support the use of the river for freight, from government policy to local policy. And I think demonstrates there through this disparity one of the fundamental problems or weaknesses of planning, in that it's one of a lot of policies, and it's for planners then to weigh up the balance. And at the moment, of course, as everyone knows, housing is one of those national priorities that we need to tackle. So we have been working with planners for many, many years. And unfortunately, one of the problems we find is that planners are in a job. 6 months later, there's a new planner in the job. So it's a continual process to keep working through them. But I think we need to redouble our efforts actually to demonstrate, particularly as we move forward to transition, that the river's opportunity, half the carbon to move freight than it is on the road, is something that needs to be protected through planning, not just through policies, but actually through decisions. And I know John feels strongly on this, as we do. And I think, I want to talk with him and with others to see how we can actually impress this more thoroughly on the boroughs than we have today. So I'll be pleased to work with him and anybody who actually thinks that this is something that London should be doing.
Great, thank you. Call to action, Jim. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go back to Peter momentarily. You've had a couple of questions and they're all relatively similar in terms of, there's a question around shore power, but there's also a question about what type of new technologies you're looking at in the future, if you're able to share as much as you can, and how the conversation with ports around shore power is developed. There's 3 questions from a couple of different people there. Sorry, Peter, but I've tried to combine it as one.
Okay, shore power. We've had a few vessels that have already equipped to hook into shore power. We've had them for a few years now. We're looking for some standardization which would be great. There are various conversations about shore power. One important thing to note is it's no point in hooking up to shore power if your vessel power is more energy efficient and greener. So what's great is the number of terminals also in the UK which are switching over to try and make sure that they have green energy. So if there is green energy available, then that's going to be much more encouraging to make sure that we hook up to shore power, which is quite frequently done already, but not universally. Okay, I think that covers off shore power. Somebody mentioned nuclear power. The answer is no. We're not looking. It was very briefly contemplated for a moment several years ago, but I don't think it's globally, it's not socially acceptable. And bearing in mind, shipping is an international trade, it's a global trade. You have to make sure that any solutions that you arrive at have to be globally acceptable as well. As far as new technologies are concerned, this is very much an ongoing thing. So for instance, last September, we opened up one of our new fleet control centers. So we, with satellites, etc., have visibility with all of our major vessels. All of the new tonnage have got smart ship technology. Briefly glimpsing into that, it's things like there's digital twin capability. So we can do preventative maintenance. You can have somebody go down and look at certain parts of the engines, etc., and be equipped with somebody in the head office who's an expert engineer to see and touch things on the ship. The ships have got, ships nowadays are like big sensor arrays. So you can see what's going on in the ship, you can see what's going on around the ship. So there's lots of sensors involved and a lot of technology so that you can look at any potential threats that there may be in the immediate vicinity, threats on board due to engine issues. There are lots of guidance systems to do with weather, to avoid the weather. One result of climate change is the weather pattern is becoming much more severe. So one of the big concerns is that what ships might have been able to do a few years ago, they have to be equipped to do much better in future. Future fuels, yeah, biofuels were already mentioned. They're a kind of stepping stone. Different fuels suit different types of ships. So probably battery power might be good for certain solutions for smaller vessels over a shorter distance. Biofuels, LNG, etc., could be good stepping stone technologies. The development of hydrogen, which could be hydrogen cells, it could be using green energy to convert by electrolysis hydrogen into ammonia, to use ammonia as a fuel. All of those things are on the horizon of something that may well be the answer to having zero emission vessels going forward. So we have to look out at all of those, but hydrogen looks the best bet for the zero option, whereas the biofuels, etc., as has been well pointed out by some of our listeners, are very good stepping stone technologies as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Peter. Very thorough appraisal of all the options that you're looking at. We're coming towards the end, so I'm going to take chair's prerogative and ask a general question for all. So Peter, you don't disappear just yet. What your thoughts are as a panel on carbon offsetting and whether that's key for your for your net zero challenge, or whether you see that as the last resort.
Okay, well, carbon offsetting, in my view, might be a tool, but we have to keep firmly focused on trying to eliminate the problem in the first place. So there are all sorts of ways in which carbon offsetting can be used in a positive way, but it can't replace actually dealing with the root issue.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to go to Victoria next. We'll do them in speaker order.
Okay, I absolutely echo what Peter said. As a charity, it's even more contentious because we would need to be using funds that are donated to the organisation for life-saving purposes to purchase offsets. So it's a very difficult issue. Absolutely, efficiency and alternative technology is critical. For us, it would have to be an absolute last resort. There's a really interesting approach from the World Wildlife Fund and Gold Standard on internal offsetting, which involves appraising and valuing the carbon emissions in your organisation in a particular area, and then investing in an equivalent amount into R&D in decarbonising that specific area of your operations. So it's sort of notional internal offsetting in that you're moving your organisation towards true decarbonisation with specific ring-fence funds. It's a really, really interesting piece of work. That seems well suited to us rather than just purchasing offsetting. But yeah, the reality is there's always going to be baseline emissions and operational requirements that just override any ability to decarbonise by 2050. So it will be one of the last challenges we tackle.
Thank you. Patrick, now I'm testing my memory now, which order everyone's come in. Patrick?
Sort of just echoing Peter and Victoria's comments, so I don't really want to repeat them specifically, but our ultimate aim is to eliminate all emitting factors across all of our facilities in Europe and globally. And it's a hard hill to climb, but with respects to offsetting, we understand it as a tool. So where the more efficient plants have offset theirs to help out the plants that maybe not performing as well, we accept that as a tool at the moment, but fundamentally the goal is to eliminate all emitting factors from each facility.
Great, thank you. And finally, Bruce.
Yeah, I don't know if going last, I have much to add. I think I agree with what everyone's said so far. I mean, I think, particularly as we look to achieve near-term targets, there may be a role, but I absolutely agree that it's about reduction and elimination of emissions first, and then offsetting or carbon sinks or whatever else second.
Great. Thank you very much. Jim, would you like to add the PLA's approach to this?
I certainly will. And I will only add a little bit more to what everyone said. And we have a range of principles that underpin our commitment to net zero. And I will just read out one of those, which relates to offsetting, which I think encapsulates our principles, which is purchase of third-party offsets to achieve net zero will only be considered as a last resort after all other options exhausted. So I think that sums up our, and from the sound of it, the entire panel's view for their own organisations.
Great, thank you very much. And hopefully, as much as I have, the listeners have enjoyed the panel and the presentations today. It's been a really illuminating rattle through, actually. So much has been covered, rattle through in an hour or so. And I hope you join me in thanking the speakers. We're certainly very grateful for you all coming to join us at the PLA for this session as the first in the three, and a trailblazer as it is. I think there's certainly an appetite to act that's coming from all the speakers across the sector and across the Thames, and that certainly echoes the approach the PLA wants to take in terms of moving forward into 2050. If we haven't tackled some of the questions, that's because they're quite specific, and we will come back to you separately on those. If there's anything that we haven't clarified after that, please do get in touch with the events team, and that we'll try and transfer those questions to the speakers should they need clarifying. We thank you all for your attendance, and you will be getting some feedback. So if there's anything we've missed, please let me and the team know, and we hope that a number of you will be joining us in the other sessions. So just as a reminder, the next session tomorrow is around innovation and change. So we're going to be talking about some of the technology innovation that I mentioned very briefly at the beginning, and our Sustainable Innovation Fund in a little bit more detail as to how our approach to shore power and solutions may come to pass. And we'll have a number of speakers from regulatory, national government and local government speaking on their approach to the innovation and change agenda. On Thursday, I've lost track of the week already. On Thursday, we have a number of speakers talking about their approach to habitats, or whether that's researching the impacts of plastics on animals, and therefore through their habitats, the concern in food chains, how we can be better at managing our impacts in terms of users. Recreation in particular is going to be covered, and we'll be talking about the PLA's habitat enhancements that are planned for later this year, and there'll be an announcement as well around our next action towards the climate and ecological emergency that we seem to find ourselves in, that we want to take action towards. So there's lots going on. As I say, they will be recorded and be posted on a link that will be shared with you in due course as terms of feedback. As concluding remarks, thank you to the panels. Great contribution and inspiring actions towards a better and cleaner future. And we hope to see some of you back tomorrow and on Thursday in due course. Thank you.